I was leaning against the airplane window, watching the clouds roll by, when Michael suddenly squeezed my hand. At first, I thought it was just one of those sweet little gestures he always did, but this time his grip was tight, almost urgent. He didn't smile. His voice was quiet, but firm as he said, "We're not alone on this plane." I gave a small laugh, thinking he was trying to make some kind of joke, but then I followed his gaze toward the back of the cabin, and my chest tightened. His eyes were locked on something, or someone, and his whole body was tense. He leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't move." My heart started pounding, and without thinking, I slid my thumb over to the call button above my head. My name is Emily Hart. I'm 28 years old, and just 2 weeks ago, I married the love of my life, Michael. We met through my older brother David 3 years ago, and from the start, Michael had this calm, steady presence that made me feel safe in a way no one else ever had. Our wedding was small and intimate, just close family and friends. My mom, Linda, my best friend, Rachel, and of course, my brother, who gave me away. Our honeymoon was supposed to be the perfect start to our new life together, a romantic trip to Italy, filled with adventure and new memories. The morning we boarded this flight, everything felt normal. The airport was busy, but nothing unusual. The cabin was crowded, but comfortable. We had the window and middle seats in row 14, with an older man named Mr. Jennings sitting on the aisle. The air smelled faintly of coffee from the galley, and we'd been happily talking about all the pasta and gelato we were going to try in Rome. But now, looking at Michael's face and feeling the tension in his hand, I knew something had changed. Michael's eyes didn't leave the back of the cabin, and I could feel the shift in his breathing. I leaned closer and asked softly, "What is it?" He didn't answer right away, just tilted his head slightly toward the aisle and said, "Don't look too long, but someone back there has been watching us." I resisted the urge to whip my head around. Instead, I adjusted in my seat, pretending to stretch my neck, and stole a quick glance over my shoulder. That's when I saw him. A man in a dark hoodie, the hood pulled halfway up, sunglasses covering his eyes. Despite the dim cabin lighting, he sat alone, his hands resting on his knees, and while his body was angled toward the front, his face was unmistakably turned in our direction. I quickly faced forward again, feeling a strange chill creep up my arms. "Maybe he's just looking around," I whispered, trying to convince myself as much as Michael, but Michael's jaw was tight. "I saw him in the terminal," he said, "by the coffee stand, then again at our gate. He was watching us then too." A knot formed in my stomach. Airports are full of strangers. You pass hundreds of people without thinking. Twice. But the way Michael said it made me uneasy. I thought back to boarding the plane. Had I seen him? I remembered a moment at the gate when I felt like someone was looking at me, but I brushed it off. Now it didn't feel so harmless. The man didn't seem to be doing anything overt, but the weight of his stare felt heavy. I kept trying to think of an innocent explanation. Maybe he was nervous to fly. Maybe he was looking past us. But every time I did, Michael would shift slightly, still keeping him in sight, and that nervous knot tightened. Half an hour into the flight, the man stood up. He didn't carry anything with him, didn't make for the lavatory right away. Instead, he moved slowly down the aisle, stopping just a few feet from our row. He turned his head slightly, eyes hidden behind the dark lenses, and I swear I felt them lock on me. My skin prickled. He lingered just long enough for me to feel frozen, then turned and headed toward the back of the plane. Michael followed him with his eyes until he was out of sight. "You see what I mean?" he said quietly. I nodded, my throat dry. When the man came back a few minutes later, he didn't just walk past. He paused again, looking down our row as if checking something. This time, Michael's grip on my hand was almost painful. The air between us felt heavy, and I could tell we were both running through the same questions. Why us? What did he want? Was this some bizarre coincidence, or was something more dangerous going on? I noticed Mr. Jennings, the older man in the aisle seat, glance up from his magazine and look at Michael with a curious expression. Michael gave him a polite but tight smile, clearly not wanting to draw attention, but I caught the faintest hint of reassurance in having another pair of eyes, aware something was off. The man in the hoodie sat down again, but didn't relax. Every few minutes, his head would turn slightly in our direction, and though his eyes were covered, the angle of his face made it clear his attention was still on us. My pulse thudded in my ears. I kept thinking about our luggage in the overhead compartment. Had he touched it? Did he slip something near our seats earlier? The scenarios in my head got darker with each passing minute. I leaned in and whispered to Michael, "Should we tell someone?" He hesitated, then said, "Not yet. Let's be sure." But being sure meant sitting there, hyper-aware of every movement behind us, every sound, every shuffle in the aisle. At one point, I thought I heard a faint click, like a camera shutter, but when I glanced sideways, I couldn't tell if it had come from him. My chest felt tight, and the once cozy hum of the engines now seemed like a cover for something sinister. Michael's eyes stayed sharp, his shoulders tense, as if ready to move at any second. The rest of the passengers seemed blissfully unaware, chatting, reading, dozing. I envied them, but I also felt trapped. If something happened, how fast could we even react on a plane? When the man got up a third time, that's when I knew this wasn't just my imagination. He didn't head for the bathroom. He stopped midway again, stood there scanning the cabin, then looked directly at us before walking toward the galley. My chest tightened, and I finally whispered, "This isn't right." Michael gave a single firm nod. Next time, we pressed the call button. There was no hesitation in his voice now, just quiet resolve. I turned my attention to the seat back in front of me, but my ears were tuned to every movement behind us. The man returned, sat down, and crossed his arms like he was settling in for the long haul. But even then, I could feel his gaze. The thought hit me hard. This wasn't just about the flight. This man might have planned something before we ever got on board. And now, 30,000 feet in the air, there was nowhere to go. The third time, Michael's hand tightened around mine. It wasn't just from unease. It was a signal. The man in the hoodie had just stood again, this time without even pretending to head toward the restroom or galley. He moved down the aisle slowly, scanning each row like he was looking for someone specific. My skin felt clammy, and my mind flashed to news stories I'd read about incidents on planes, people smuggling things on board, targeting certain passengers. I knew we couldn't keep sitting there, just waiting to see what he'd do next. Michael leaned toward me and said in a low, steady voice, "When he turns his back, press the button." I nodded, trying to keep my breathing even, my fingers already brushing the plastic of the call button above my head. When the man finally passed us, Michael's eyes tracked him until he was a few steps away. I reached up and pressed the button, hearing the faint chime that signaled for a flight attendant. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Seconds later, a young flight attendant named Sarah appeared, her bright smile dimming slightly when she saw our faces. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly, crouching a little to be level with us. Michael didn't waste time. "We think someone on this flight has been watching us closely. It's making us uncomfortable." Sarah's eyes flickered in the direction Michael subtly indicated, and her professional expression didn't change, but I saw the quick understanding in her gaze. "Stay in your seats," she murmured. "I'll take a look." She walked toward the back casually, as if she was just checking on passengers, but I saw the man in the hoodie glance up at her. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just shifted slightly in his seat. Sarah disappeared into the galley area, and Michael exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath. A minute later, she returned, leaning down again. I saw him. "I'll have the purser speak with him, but I need you to tell me, has he said anything to you? Approached you in the terminal? Tried to give you anything?" Her tone was calm, but carried weight. Michael shook his head. "No words, but I saw him at the gate, watching us. He's gotten up multiple times just to stand near our row. I added, "It's not just passing by. He stops, looks right at us." Sarah gave a small nod, then glanced at Mr. Jennings in the aisle seat. "Sir, I might need to ask you to swap seats temporarily." He didn't hesitate, standing and letting Sarah slide into his place beside Michael. Having her there felt like a thin shield between us and the unknown, but my nerves were still frayed. Sarah spoke quietly, explaining that the crew had procedures for situations like this, and they'd assess if he was a threat. As she spoke, I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. The man was standing again, moving toward the front this time. Sarah straightened, stepping slightly into the aisle, her body angled to block his direct path to us. He slowed, his head tilting as if measuring her presence, then turned sharply and went back to his seat. My chest loosened just a little, but Michael's grip on my hand didn't ease. "He's not going to stop," Michael said under his breath. Sarah agreed. "We're going to move you both to the front. It's easier for us to keep you safe there." She signaled to another crew member, and within a minute, we were gathering our small items. Our carry-on stayed above, but Michael made sure to grab our passports and phones. We followed Sarah toward the front, my pulse quickening as we passed the man's row. I felt his head turn toward us, the weight of his unseen eyes following until we were out of his view. The crew settled us into 2 empty seats near the galley, where they could keep constant watch. Even with the crew between us, the tension didn't fade. I kept picturing him standing in the aisle, scanning the cabin, lingering by our row. Every time someone walked past now, I tensed, expecting to see that hooded figure. But this time, instead of waiting for him to come to us, the crew was ready to act first. Sarah spoke briefly into her radio, and I caught words like passenger observation, security concern, and log incident. Michael sat beside me, his knee bouncing slightly, his eyes trained on the aisle. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "stay beside me." I nodded, the reality of the situation sinking in deeper. This wasn't just nerves. This was a deliberate pattern, and now that the crew was involved, there was no pretending otherwise. When the purser finally approached the man's row, I craned my neck slightly, trying to see without drawing attention. The purser crouched, speaking to him for a moment. The man didn't react with surprise. If anything, his posture stiffened. Then, to my shock, he stood and began reaching into his carry-on under the seat. I saw Sarah step closer, her stance firm. Michael's hand found mine, again, and this time, I didn't let go. Whatever was in that bag, whatever reason he had for being on this plane, we were no longer just passengers trying to ignore it. We were part of something that could change the course of this flight entirely. The moment the man in the hoodie unzipped his bag, my breath caught in my throat. His movements were deliberate, not rushed, as if he wanted to make a point that he wasn't afraid of the attention. Sarah stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "Sir, please keep your belongings stowed." He froze mid-motion, then slowly turned his head toward her. I couldn't see his full face from where I was, but the angle of his body told me he was staring her down. The purser moved in beside her, creating a physical barrier between him and the aisle. Michael's grip on my hand tightened until my fingers ached, and I realized my heart was pounding so hard it almost hurt. The man finally withdrew his hand from the bag, but instead of zipping it closed, he slid it partially under the seat again, as if daring them to question him further. Sarah didn't flinch. "Sir, I need you to stand and come with me to the front of the aircraft," she said. Her tone wasn't angry, but it was absolute, like there was no room for negotiation. For a tense second, he didn't move. Then he rose slowly, towering slightly over her, his hoodie shadowing most of his face. As he stepped into the aisle, his eyes shifted, past her, past the purser, straight to me. It wasn't a glance of recognition or curiosity. It was the kind of look that said, "I know exactly who you are." My stomach turned cold, and I instinctively leaned into Michael. The crew guided him toward the front, past our new seats, and I could feel his gaze on me the entire way. When they reached the galley, the purser positioned himself between the man and the rest of the cabin, while Sarah leaned in to speak with the captain through the interphone. The man stood there, his hands in his pockets now, rocking slightly on his heels as though he was completely unbothered. I wanted to believe that maybe this was all a misunderstanding, that maybe Michael and I had overreacted. But then, something small and metallic slid from the cuff of his sleeve and disappeared back inside before I could even make sense of it. My blood ran cold. I looked at Michael, and his expression told me he'd seen it too. "Stay here," he whispered, his voice tense. Minutes felt like hours as the crew conferred quietly. Then, without warning, the man shifted his weight and stepped toward Sarah. The purser blocked him instantly, his hand subtly raised in a stopping motion. "Sir, please remain where you are," he said. The man's shoulders tensed, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of irritation cross his face. His lips moved, saying something I couldn't hear, but the tone was low and sharp. Sarah's eyes didn't leave him. "Sir, if you continue to act in this manner, we will divert this flight," she said clearly. The entire section of the cabin went silent. That's when I saw it, tucked partially inside the open bag now resting on the counter of the galley. A folded piece of paper with my name written on it. Not just Emily, my full name, in block letters. My throat tightened, and I reached for Michael's arm. "He has something with my name on it," I whispered. Michael's jaw clenched as his eyes darted toward the galley. Sarah must have noticed too, because her posture shifted. She stepped forward, slid the paper from the bag in one swift motion, and tucked it into her pocket without breaking eye contact with the man. "Please take your seat," the purser said again, but this time his voice was harder. The man hesitated, then, with an almost mocking slowness, walked back down the aisle toward the rear of the plane. I held my breath as he passed us, my body rigid, praying he wouldn't stop. He didn't. He kept going until he reached his original seat, where he sat, leaned back, and pulled his hood further down over his face. Sarah came to us a few minutes later, her voice low. "We can't open the note until we land, but we're keeping eyes on him. The captain is aware. We'll have authorities meet us when we arrive." I nodded, but the knot in my chest wouldn't loosen. Every instinct in me screamed that whatever was in that note was the key to everything. I kept my eyes on the man for the rest of the flight, watching for every movement, every shift in posture. When we finally began our descent, Sarah returned, the folded note still in her hand. "We're landing soon," she said. "Once we're on the ground, you'll be escorted off first. The authorities will speak to you." My mouth was dry as I asked, "What about him?" She gave a small, tight smile. "He won't be leaving before they do." The wheels touched down, and I gripped Michael's hand like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. As soon as the seatbelt sign went off, uniformed officers stepped onto the plane. The man in the hoodie didn't resist when they approached, but as they led him away, his head turned toward me one last time. The smallest, coldest smirk crossed his lips before he disappeared from sight. The note, now in Sarah's hand, felt heavier than it should, and in that moment, I knew that whatever it contained, our lives had just changed forever. The airport felt unnaturally loud after the tense silence of the cabin. People hurried past with rolling suitcases, voices blending into an indistinct hum. But all I could focus on was the crumpled note in Sarah's hand. Michael stayed close to me as we were led into a small, windowless security office. 2 uniformed officers and a woman in plain clothes, who introduced herself as Detective Harper, entered behind us. Sarah placed the note on the table and stepped back. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to take it. The paper was ordinary, torn from a small notepad, but seeing my name printed in thick black ink made my stomach twist. I unfolded it slowly. The handwriting inside was neat but oddly deliberate, each letter precise, almost mechanical. The message was short, only 9 words. You look just like her. She didn't listen either. My pulse roared in my ears. Michael leaned over my shoulder, reading it silently before looking at me with a mixture of confusion and concern. Who's her? He asked, his voice low. My throat felt tight as I tried to process the words. I don't know, I whispered, but even as I said it, fragments of memories flickered in my mind. Old family stories, hushed conversations I had overheard as a child, my mother's face when certain names were mentioned. Detective Harper's expression remained unreadable as she took the note from me. Does this mean anything to you? Any resemblance to someone you know? I shook my head, though part of me wondered if that was entirely true. There was a faint itch in my memory, a sense that I'd heard something like this before, but it was buried too deep to reach. Harper's gaze shifted to Michael. You said you saw something metallic fall from his sleeve? Michael nodded. Yeah, couldn't see exactly what it was, but it didn't look like anything harmless. One of the officers explained that the man in the hoodie had no identification on him, no boarding pass in his pocket. He had boarded during a gate change confusion, sitting in an empty seat at the rear of the plane. The bag he carried contained only a few items: an empty water bottle, a folded hoodie, and a pocket knife. Illegal on the flight, but not the kind of weapon that would normally warrant major attention. Still, the combination of his behavior, the note, and his fixation on me was enough for them to detain him. They asked if I wanted to press charges for harassment. I said yes, but the word felt hollow because it was obvious this was about more than harassment. The note's message clung to me like a shadow. Sarah excused herself quietly after giving her statement, her face still tight with concern. Before leaving, she touched my shoulder and said, "You did the right thing." I nodded, but my chest felt heavy. When the questioning was over, Michael and I were free to leave, but neither of us wanted to go straight to the hotel. We ended up sitting in a quiet airport cafe, hands wrapped around cups of untouched coffee. "What do you think it means?" Michael finally asked. I stared at the note on the table between us. I think someone thinks I'm connected to a woman who didn't listen, and whatever she didn't listen to, maybe it got her killed. The words sounded ridiculous when spoken aloud, but the unease in my gut didn't fade. That night in the hotel, I called my mother. At first, I didn't tell her the whole story, just mentioned that something unsettling had happened on the flight. But when I read the note to her, there was a long, unnatural pause on the other end. "Mom?" I prompted. Her voice, when it came, was softer than usual. "Emily, there's something I should have told you years ago." The conversation that followed made it almost impossible to sleep. She told me about her college roommate, a woman named Claire who had been stalked for months by a man she had met only once. Claire dismissed the warnings, thinking he was just harmlessly infatuated. One night, she vanished. The police never found her, but there had been notes, short, cryptic, and eerily similar to the one I received. My mother admitted she had testified in the investigation and had been warned to keep a low profile afterward. She had never heard from the man again, until now. As she spoke, the reality sank in. This wasn't a random encounter on a flight. This was deliberate. Whether the man in the hoodie was the same person or someone connected to him, he had targeted me because of who I looked like, maybe because of my mother, maybe because of Claire. The next morning, Detective Harper called to say the man refused to give his real name. He was being held for further questioning, but without a stronger charge. There was a chance he could be released. She advised me to be cautious, to vary my routines when we returned home, and to contact her immediately if I saw anything unusual. Michael and I tried to salvage the rest of our honeymoon, but the shadow of that flight lingered over every moment. Crowds felt dangerous. Every glance from a stranger made me tense. On our last night in Italy, I sat on the hotel balcony and stared out at the city lights, wondering if Claire had ever felt this same sense of being watched. The note is now locked in a drawer at home, but I can't bring myself to throw it away. It's a reminder that sometimes danger isn't loud or obvious. It's quiet, patient, and personal. I've learned to trust my instincts completely because the cost of ignoring them could be everything. And while I still don't know exactly what "she didn't listen" meant, I know one thing for certain: I will never, ever make that mistake.